Howdy, folks. Today we're talking about Kodachrome, the remarkable story of the two young musicians who helped change color photography forever. See, it's always musicians. That's what happens. Yeah, we're also going to be talking about the discipline of shooting film, the magic of slides, and why a discontinued film stock still holds such a powerful place in photography culture. Right after this. Welcome to Camera Shake, where we bring you the insider scoop on all things photography and videography, giving you a unique opportunity to stay ahead of the curve. We've spent literally hundreds of hours interviewing some of the most renowned photographers, filmmakers, and creative entrepreneurs in the world, giving you access to knowledge and expertise that's simply not available anywhere else except for the B&H podcast. You can check that out too. As always, I'm your host, Kersten. And if you're like me and you enjoy free podcast and YouTube content, you can support the show by buying us a coffee over at buymeacoffee.com/Camera Shake. You can also check out the official Camera Shake podcast merchandise over at camerashakepodcast.com. So every bit of support helps us continue creating more exciting episodes for you. But of course, you're more than welcome to say no hard feelings at all. Just know that your support really does make a difference, and I might start crying. But anyway, without further ado, let's give it up for today's special guest. He's a photographer, writer, educator, former founding host of the B&H Photography Podcast, and the author of the new book, Kodachrome: How Two Guys Named Leo Changed Photography. Please welcome Allan Weitz. Allan, man, how's it going?
Greetings. Nice to be here. I love the intro. It's a lot of fun. Yeah. This is a giggle. You mentioned something that's kind of true about people with Kodachrome and also this interest in it. And it is a funny thing that a roll of film that all of a sudden everybody's into this whole thing. Everybody knows it. Even people who've only shot with their phones know what Kodachrome is. And I really can't figure out what it is.
It's a funny thing because nobody really thinks of Akfar in the same way, you know?
No, I couldn't write a book on Tri-X. When I looked at it, it's interesting, but I mean, I think that's one of the best parts about it, aside from the fact that the film itself was such a remarkable film. Anybody who shot it will testify to that. I don't know of any other photographic product that has a backstory like this, which is really what makes it kind of fun, the whole thing. And there are a lot of little things about Kodachrome that are kind of neat that made it into what I considered a good idea for a book. And one of the things I think it's important to mention is that when people hear Kodachrome, they're thinking automatically that it's photography. And one of the things that from feedback that I've gotten from people who've seen the book is that it's not really just a photography book because about a third of the book, it's 174 pages. About a third of those pages is dedicated specifically to advertising of Kodachrome going back to 1935. And what's really, really cool about it is that the same ad agency handled it. J. Walter Thompson out of Chicago. They started working with Kodak, I think, around 1930, a few years before Kodachrome came out. And they handled all of the advertising almost till the last 5 years or so, which is pretty remarkable. So you have one agency handling the advertising for the same product and its related products because it wasn't just film. There were projectors, there were screens, there were cameras. There was a whole family of products that were born and sold through Kodachrome. And the same agency handled it. And it's really funny to watch the evolution of advertising from real stodgy, parochial, black and white ads to really, really progressive, fine artwork using premier photographers. So it's a lot of fun in that sense.
Do you think Kodachrome is making such a sort of cult re-emergence because the brand name has sort of, for all intents and purposes, disappeared from, from general consciousness? I'm thinking, like, is there some nostalgia involved in sort of re-emergence of Kodak? I'll tell you why I ask this, actually, because my 15-year-old daughter, who has never shot film, only knows of film anecdotally because I harp on about it. And she wanted a point and shoot camera for her 15th birthday just a month ago, which I found really interesting because I'm like, point and shoot? why? But apparently it's the trend, right? And so
Yeah.
there's tons of obviously cheap, Chinese, like $10, like, I don't know, $20 kind of cameras that you can get. But I found some Kodak branded ones and I bought one of those. And it was sort of nostalgia on my part, actually. I think Kodak? There's like, sure, that's gotta be better than some Chinesey thing, you know? Um, no,
And then you found out it was a Chinesey thing because it's just a licensed name.
I know, but actually the camera's pretty good. I mean, I have to say, I was really pleasantly surprised, and she loves it, which, which to me was like, "Well, you're 15, you're just using phone for everything, right?" But not not so much. So, for someone who has never shot a roll of Kodachrome, what was it that made it so special? Or what was so special about it?
Um, when I started out back in the late '70s, freelancing, doing editorial work, most art directors and designers and picture editors would request Kodachrome, assuming there was time, because you have to keep in mind, you would shoot the film and then you had to send it to Kodak, which could be, depending on where you live and where the processing lab was, could take 2, 3 days, even a week. At one point in the late '80s into the '90s, there was in New York City, New York Film Works, which was on Fifth Avenue and 22nd Street, and you were able to drop off Kodachrome at 9 in the morning and pick it up at 5 in the afternoon, or
Okay.
drop it off by 8 to have it at 9 in the morning. That was revolutionary, and when that happened, there were very few times when I would shoot anything but Kodachrome. Why? The color was that much better. It just had a different feel to it. The grain was a lot tighter. It was a very contrasty film. You had to expose for the highlights and let the shadows go where they are. What I find really interesting is that now I'm scanning some of my Kodak many of my Kodachromes, and the images I'm getting are better than the original ones, because now with a scanner, I can go in and open up those shadows and stuff, which you could not do really back in the day. The printers could open up a limited amount of the shadow detail, but now you could really see what the film got, and it's really remarkable. Is it sharper than digital? No, it's not. Once you get past 18 megapixel, you now have a sharper image if you're shooting a full frame digital camera. But there's a look and a feel to it that is just hard to replace.
Yeah, I mean, you used, Kodachrome for close to, like, 3 decades.
Yeah.
What did it mean to you personally as a photographer?
Um, I didn't think much of it, honestly. It was just my tool of choice. That's what I used. Some people drive Chevys, some people drive Fords. Is one better than the other? Ask one of the other people that'll tell you the counter argument. It just seemed to be the film that everybody agreed upon was the best vehicle to shoot with. Um, I never had anybody argue with me about turning in a Kodachrome. I've had some Fujichrome comments. In fact, when Fujichrome first came out with Velvia, I loved it. I thought it was a lot of fun. It was like crayons. And I remember I photographed some speedboats for Boating Magazine, and it was a bright sunny day, and I used a polarizing filter because, again, you want to suck everything out of it. And I put the slides down on the light box, and he stepped back at me and he goes, "Wow, what were you smoking when you shot this stuff?" It's like he said, "What is this?" It was just everything was exaggerated, and I think it's one of the problems I had with Fuji color digital cameras, that they really pump up the colors. You could always tell it's a Fuji digital camera. It has a unique look to it. It looks great, but it's not real.
Yeah.
So, I that might have been part of it too, is that Kodachrome was just real. It had, the best rendition of color and tonality.
But nowadays, people talk about color science, when they compare Canon to Nikon to Fuji to Sony, and so on. Did the brand of camera actually matter back in the days of film, or was it just literally just down to the film?
No, not at all. In fact, I think it even says here on my shirt, Kodak for, contacts and Leica cameras. That's what they were at, 'cause that's what the 35 millimeter cameras were. No, the camera was irrelevant. If you wanted to change the look of your picture, you did that through the choice of film. now we have settings and we have, all kinds of looks and things of that sort. But back then, if you would often choose your film based on what kind of a look you wanted to have. For me, doing editorial it was Kodachrome, whether I was shooting in the studio or outside. But there were times I would revert to Ektachrome for a specific tonality, or I needed it back in an hour and a half. Uh, there's other realities that went into it as well. Um, I'm trying to think. What was the question? I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, what was it? I
Part
mean,
of that part.
you mentioned Ektachrome. What was the difference back in those days between films like Kodachrome and Ektachrome, for example? Is it
Yeah, Kodachrome and Ektachrome. Ektachrome always had more of a bluer cast to it. Um, I would often shoot Ektachrome if it was overcast out because it handled overcast skies and that tonality and color better than Kodachrome. It was less critical. I would be shooting Kodachrome under crappy weather, but not by choice. If I knew it was gonna be lousy weather out, I would definitely, get, Ektachrome 64 or, EPN. There's depending on when it was, there were different variations of it. And I also went to Fujichrome for the same reason. There was certain times when, there was a color to the 100 speed, Fujichrome that I really, really liked. It was a nice film. And again, do I have time to shoot Kodachrome? That was often, an issue too. If I didn't have time, I would choose, one of the E6 process films, and I would choose that based on, what the subject was.
what was the moment when you realized that this was a story, that Kodachrome was a story substantial enough to become a book?
It was on my mind for a long time. I thought it was always kind of funny that there was a song called Kodachrome, which of course I loved. And then there was a movie about Kodachrome. And again, Kodachrome was just a backstory about for the actual story of what it was. And I noticed that a lot of little things about it. If you go through old National Geographic magazines, it says not photographs by, it says Kodachromes by. Now, there were also some Ektachromes by, but that was quickly replaced. And you don't see that anymore. You're not gonna see a magazine credit, photograph, credited to a Canon, R series camera. It's not happening. It's simply not happening. Um, and it seemed to be in discussions a lot. I think it was even kind of funny that when I started, pitching the dummy of my book, there it is right there. This is what I was went around hawking, which is about 90%. It's about 90% of what's in the final book. It's pretty accurate to what we actually put out. Um, I showed it to, somebody who said, "I have somebody for you to call," and that person called up, Bruce Rutledge over at Shin Music Press, and, it was Mary Bixby Dee, who's my, publicist, and she said, "I have a book you might be interested in." He was a small publisher in Seattle, and, he goes, "What's it about?" She goes, "The title is Kodachrome," and he goes, "I have to see it because I've had that song in my mind all day long." So, it seemed to click. Oh, well, when it was leading up to before, is that again, it's not just photography, and I started talking about the advertising aspect of it. So if you're into advertising and marketing, this is a really, really cool book. If you're into pop culture, it's a really cool book because I have a whole section on things that have the Kodachrome name on it, from water bottles to picnic coolers to pens with exposure meters built into them. I have a 25 gig thumb drive. That's a Kodachrome 25 canister. A lot of funny little things that I found. I just started scouring eBay, and I just started buying stuff, and that became a whole section of the book. I have a postcard from 1952 of an atomic bomb going off in Nevada, photographed on Kodachrome.
Oh,
You
wow.
know, so there's all kinds of funny little eclectic things, and I don't see that for other types of film. It's only Kodachrome.
Yeah.
Why,
It
I don't know.
it's really remarkable how it's sort of, it has risen from the dead for all intents and purposes, and it's become it's sort of crept back into, I mean, really into pop culture and into the general kind of consciousness, I think. Was the book driven more by, affection for the actual film stock, or, um, or was it sort of concern that history was being forgotten, for example, or was it just simply curiosity?
It's a love story.
Perfect.
That's what it is. No, seriously, I read through it right now, and it's a love story, okay? It's warm memories of a film that was my medium for, 3 decades. Um, I have my whole professional history documented on Kodachrome, and it's really interesting that these images last. One of the batches of images that I bought when I was scouring, eBay, I got a little batch of images that were from the, uh early '60s, and it was a mixture of Ektachrome and Kodachrome slides, and they were obviously stored together. The Kodachromes are gorgeous. The Ektachromes are cyan and blue. They're fading and
Yeah.
shifting in colors. I have Kodachromes from World War II. Now we're talking 80 years ago. They're gorgeous, okay? That's one of the beauties of it is that the film is lasting. It has an estimated life under decent storage conditions of about 180 years before noticeable fading starts to occur. I don't know of any other color process that could make that claim.
That's really interesting because I remember as a kid, just for context, and people who listen to this podcast will know this by now because I've mentioned it a million times. My dad was a photographer and my grandmother was a photographer. And I remember looking through tons of photo albums when I was a kid and like picking up stacks of prints and so on. And I remember even back in the late 80s, I would say, maybe late 80s, picking up some prints and they were literally red. Everything had gone to red for some reason. And you flip over the print on the back, it will say ACFA, you know. But then
Mhm.
there were also prints that looked fine, and more often than not, I remember turning over the print and it'll say Kodak on it. So even back then, I really didn't know anything about it. In fact, I was rebelling against the whole still photography thing when I was a kid. But um, but I remember back then becoming suspicious over the fact that some types of film or some images seem to have this tendency to fade, and others didn't. You know,
And the manufacturers did not talk about it. Kodak knew that Kodachrome had far better archival qualities than their other E6 color films, all their Ektachromes. Um, but they wouldn't talk about it because they made more money on the Ektachrome. Ektachrome turned out to be more of a cash cow because of the fact that anybody could develop it. Even though Kodachrome was devised in the bathtub of an apartment on the Upper West Side, which is a great story altogether, you can develop Ektachrome, Fujichrome, any E6 film, and anybody who's halfway proficient in film development can do it. You just need accurate temperatures and timers and the right, developing gear. You can do it. You could never do that with Kodachrome. It was impossible. It was far too complex to ever even conceive of doing that. That's just part of the whole thing. I don't know what it is.
what do people usually, or what do people most often misunderstand? When they talk about that Kodachrome look, what is that?
I would say the most noticeable thing here's what comes to my mind. Every once in a while, we'll be, driving or I'll look out the window, and I'll call my wife over because it's quick. It's a Kodachrome sunset. Yeah, no, there are certain tones in the sky, specifically some of those cyan tones, that little bit of a cyan, that little tone that no other film can get, and when you nail it on Kodachrome, you look at it and you go, "There it is." Now here's the fun part, or the ironic funny part about the whole thing is that you get this on the transparency, but once you see it in the magazine or you make a print from it, it's no longer what it was. If you scan it, look at it on a computer screen, it's no longer the Kodachrome. And that's kind of the funny catch-22 is that the only way of really appreciating Kodachrome is to eyeball it on a light box
Right.
or project it, because as soon as you go into another variation of it, you print it or it's 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 everything else.
This episode is brought to you by Platypod. You know these moments when you really need a tripod, but taking one with you just feels like too much effort? Too big, too heavy, too awkward to carry around? Well, that's exactly why I love Latitude. I use it in my own work because it gives me a really solid, stable platform for my camera in places where a regular tripod simply is not practical. There's the rugged extreme for larger camera setups, the incredibly versatile Delta, the compact traveler for when space is tight, and the handle, which lets you position your camera in all sorts of creative places. And for portrait photographers, Bracket & Bounce is a brilliant portable lighting solution. It helps create flattering directional light without dragging softboxes around, or depending on whatever ceiling happens to be above you. For landscapes, macro, video, wildlife, portraits, or travel photography, Platypod helps you get shots that would otherwise be difficult or even impossible. Head over to platypod.com to take a look. Platypod, where innovation never sleeps. Let's talk a little bit about the book itself. Now,
Sure.
Your subtitle, the subtitle of the book is, how two guys named Leo changed photography. Who were Leo Manis? Is that how you pronounce it? And Leo Godowski. And
Okay.
why is it that their story is so extraordinary?
Okay, long story short, because it's actually not that a long story. In 1916, two 16-year-old classically trained musicians, and by the way, you'll sometimes see 17-year-old. They were 6 months apart. One was born in December, the one in May. So depending on what, they were 16 or 17. But basically, two 16-year-old teenagers, classically trained musicians. They both come from musical families. Um, they were also photo enthusiasts, and they saw an advertisement for a movie called Our Navy, which was filmed in Prismacolor, which is supposed to be better than all of the other film processes available at the time. So they went to see the movie, and when they left, there's no record of what they thought about the makeup, costumes, or the storyline, but they thought the color was terrible, and they said, "I don't know, we could do a better job than this." And they started puttering around after hours in the bathrooms and kitchen sinks of their parents' apartments on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And they did this for close to 20 years. I mean, they were ultimately thrown out of their parents' apartments, were renting hotel rooms. And yeah, and luckily because they were in the theater world, I just saw a couple of quick notes here that Victor Leopold Manis, his maternal grandfather was Leopold Damrosch, who was a world-famous conductor. His parents founded the Mannes College of Music, and he studied music and physics at Harvard, earned a Pulitzer Music Scholarship and a Guggenheim Fellowship to study music in Italy. He's no fool, all right? Leopold Godowski, they both happen to have the same name, Leopold, so they became known as the two Leos, or when they're in Kodak, they were called God and Man, which I kind of think is kind of cool. Godowski, he's the son of composer pianist Leopold Godowski Sr. He studied violin at UCLA and went on to become a soloist with the San Francisco Symphony and the LA Philharmonic Orchestras. And his wife, Frances, is Georgian Ira Gershwin's sister. So these people were connected. They had very good connections with things. So they were able to experiment and project their movies at the movie theaters in New York City because their parents, knew people that had movie theaters. And after a lot of experimenting, they got the attention of Dr. Kenneth Meese of Kodak. When he was 33, he founded the Kodak Research Park. He was hired by Easton himself to start it up. And he was following what Manis and Godowski were doing and started helping them. He was producing some of their emulsions to their specs and selling it to them at cost to help them get along. They also managed to get a $20,000 loan for their research from a New York investment firm. And that got them started. They ended up doing about 40 patents before Meese offered them a position at Kodak to come up to Rochester and continue their work there. They gave him $30,000, most of which went to paying off that loan, $7,500 a year each salary, and they owned the patents to all of their research prior to working for Kodak. So that was it. So they're in their 30s, and they started working for Kodak on April 15th, 1935. Kodak unveiled Kodachrome.
That's,
Um,
that's just in modern terms. $30,000 back in 30 would have been, I think that's 25 times the amount now, if I'm correct. So that's a good chunk of money, actually.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. No, absolutely. I remember when back in the '50s, my father was earning $8,000. We thought we were rich. 7,500 back in 1935.
Yeah,
It's like, that's
absolutely.
pretty cool.
Yeah,
It's a
so,
lot of
they
money.
like, I remember, like, my in-laws, for instance, they, talking about, like, how back in the day, like, back in the early '70s, you could buy a house for 7.5 grand over here in the UK, which, it's like it buys you know, it doesn't even buy you a car these days, It's wild. Um,
I have an advertisement for Volkswagen. You can buy a brand new VW for $999.
those were the days, man. Those were the days. That same car, by the way, now will cost you, like, you'd have to sell your children to afford one of them. What was the thing that was so disappointing about color photography, and color cinema, when they first began experimenting? Because in my head, I'm always thinking about, when I think about especially color film, as in cinema, I'm thinking about sort of the Alfred Hitchcock period, the '40s, maybe mid to late '40s when it started to switch, early '50s when it started to switch in cinema. Because even Hitchcock made, black and white movies for a long time during his career. I was perplexed how early on people actually started experimenting, and actually producing, color film. Um, but by modern standards, what was the thing that was so disappointing, back in the day?
Well, color film, it came to being about, I think, 50 years or so before, Kodachrome was released. Kodachrome was far from the first color film. The problem with a lot of the earlier versions was that they were mostly two color, where you would shoot through, red or blue filters and onto black and white film and then project them through that. I mean, it was a whole weird process
Mm.
using multiple projectors that had to be aligned. And even if you did have 3 colors, it would also be aligned projectors, but usually most of the earlier processes were two-color systems that faked full color, which meant that usually there was a color missing. Like one of the variations of one of the early processes, there was no blue layer in it, so therefore skies were non-existent. You could just shoot it for portraits, but you couldn't use it for landscapes. But a bigger problem was that the emulsions themselves, the colors would bleed from one layer to the next. You would have muddiness. The emulsions were thick, so they absorbed a lot of light. Some of the, film emulsions absorbed 70% of the light. Now you try projecting through that, and you have a dim, ghostly, pale image, and that was the big problem with all of the earlier versions. It was so complex that by the time it got to the screen, it was just a ghost. So Kodachrome, kind of eliminated all that. It was bright, it had full color spectrum. The earliest version, by the way, was extremely difficult and only lasted for 2 or 3 years. They brought somebody else in to reformulate it, and they had to go through a process where they would be re-exposing, each color to fresh light during the processing. But initially, they'd have to go through it with a microscope during the processing. It was ridiculously complex and expensive. So the process itself was modified over time.
It's really interesting, when you talk about the complexity of the process and everything, and yet there are two musicians, who are basically, conjuring up stuff in the bathroom. And what does it tell you about their obsession? With skies, man.
Well, actually, in 1954, there was a terrific interview with, Godowski in the New Yorker, really, really good, and he actually admits that they were blissfully ignorant when they set out to do this. So, that's really what it is, but they were really determined. I mean, they went through a lot of, disappointments, a lot of failures. They went by their gut a lot. One of the funny little anecdotes is that they didn't trust timers, to because it was very critical. The timing and everything was in total darkness. So since they were, musicians, they would whistle, I think it was, Brahms' symphony, a final part of it, to a metronome set to 2 beats a second, and that's how they timed processing, by whistling Brahms symphonies.
That's actually very interesting, because I don't know if you remember this, but at the beginning, of the pandemic, do you remember, people were told to wash their hands for a certain amount of time, and they used a similar concept, but they basically said, "Sing happy birthday 3 times whilst you're washing your hands." So
Yeah, that's
very
right.
very similar concept.
Yeah, 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 that's right. Yeah, I didn't use a metronome when I sang that, though.
No, that would have been weird, but it's just it's a public restroom. Hang on a minute, let me just turn this metronome. Um, Now, they were picked up at some point by Kodak. How far had they come along in their development of color film by the time when, when Kodak figured out, "Actually, there's something to it, we'll invest into this."
Well, it was this Dr. Nice who actually, had the real interest and time investment in them. He really believed that they had something that was gonna work, and if they were gonna make it work, he wanted Kodak to have it. Now, what's interesting is that around the same time that, their parents started saying, "It's time to get your toys out of the bathtub and go find someplace else to play," um, they were, tracking down, George Eastman, and, they wanted to meet with him, and they knew that he came into Manhattan every once in a while, so they made an appointment to see him, and he sat down, he spoke with them and, met with them and, uh, expressed interest and said he's gonna see what he can do to help them. They never heard from him again.
Wow.
So it was actually, Eastman's hiring, a Dr. Nice who caught on to what the 2 Leos were doing and basically made sure that they could cross the finish line. He was really, really, an important part of the story.
What was the thing when you really started diving into this whole story, what was the thing that surprised you the most, especially about the early development of Kodachrome?
Um, I think the timing of it was really, really fascinating because there's a bigger story, which I really don't get into too much in the book, I should have, and that is that Kodachrome came out in 1935. Now, that's just a few years after Leica came out with the first 35 millimeter camera, all right, within a decade of that.
Mm.
That was a big thing in Europe. That camera was a big boost to the German government, especially the rising government that was there. They got a lot of mileage out of the prestige of this German equipment. Um, and it was also the time of the rise of magazines. That is the beginning of the golden age of magazines, and they were mostly black and white. And now suddenly, vivid color was available with cameras that are easy to use. So there was a whole thing going on. You have the camera industry coming out with cameras that are now people friendly. Okay, they're no longer as complex to use. That was another beauty of the Kodak cameras. They were really good cameras, really well made, great optics, and just solid machines. So there was an evolution of that. The magazines, people are now seeing pictures in color, travel, fashion. So color is becoming more and more part of our culture, and Kodachrome kept up with it in that sense. It was the vehicle to capture that color that we now have.
It's an interesting thing because there's often, I think there's a correlation between, um, like developments that just happen to occur at the same time, and they almost make each other possible. Like, for example, with the invention of 35 millimeter film and 35 millimeter film cameras, was another stage that really made photography so accessible to the masses, where you didn't need huge cameras anymore. You could now have small cameras and, shoot with 35 millimeter film as opposed to medium format film, for example. Um, I mean, technically speaking, what made Kodachrome different from the color films that were around at the time?
I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, the only thing I keep coming back to would be that the color was just that much better. And it's what professionals were using, so therefore, that's what the common man was using. I mean, from my memories, I don't remember anybody shooting color slides. I really, really don't. I mean, to me, it was always Kodacolor or Ektachrome. It was color negative film, which is what I think most people were shooting. I know for family stuff, we never shot slides. I didn't start shooting slides till I was a student in high school, and I was a photo major. And I don't even remember why I started shooting slides. What made me pick them up? I don't know. Uh, but I would say for most people, for family use, it was probably still color negative film that would be the most popular number one choice for family, casual shooting, travel, and things of that sort. And it was more of the serious photographer, the enthusiast who really wanted to see, how much detail we can get out of this, how much good color in there. Because one of the problems of shooting color negative is that the print you're looking at is the color of that print is determined usually by a machine. And it's an average of all of the negatives that are going through that machine at that particular time. It's sort of an average color balance and exposure quite often. Which means that your colors may not be accurate. Whereas when you shoot a transparency, that's the original. That's it. So the color that you have there, that is the color that it was. If it was exposed properly and again, you weren't shooting daylight under a tungsten or something, a bad the wrong color medium. The colors you had were the accurate colors, and that is something that a printer would want to have, somebody who is reproducing photographs, because you ever try looking at a color negative, that orange color negative, and just try
Yeah.
to figure out what that color you can't.
I used to do
It's
that all the
really
time when I was a kid. Man, I tried so many different things. But, you're absolutely right. Because I remember, like, from my parents, um, mostly people would use color film, as in, like, prints. Um, but all of my friends who were, like, photography nerds, they would always shoot on transparencies and shoot and make slides. And I remember these endless sessions of having to go around to, another one of my parents' friends and having to sit there as a kid, having to look at your projector would come out and you'd have to look at all these slides. I secretly liked it. I just didn't want to admit it when I was a kid. I think that's the that's the thing. But this is at a time, when video cameras or camcorders became readily available, and I thought, I fancied myself as the next Steven Spielberg, not the next, like, you know, um, Ansel Adams, at the time. I mean, boy, was I wrong. Um, but I also know this is again, like, I'm really fascinated by your book because the one thing you describe in the book is how difficult it actually was to expose accurately using Kodachrome because you mentioned there's very little latitude when it comes to exposure. Like, how unforgiving was it actually in real world use?
um, an accurate exposure would be within 1/3, and you have to go for the highlights. If you just did an average, I used to do a lot of boating and yachting, and try getting white sails and shadows and all the contrast of being out on the water on a sunny day. It was impossible. So what you'd have to do is you'd expose for the highlights and let the shadows go where they were. Usually it'd be okay. If it was really bad, the printer could quite often open up the shadows post production and save it that way. Not that it was a major, major problem, but if it was harsh contrast, like this time of year, especially June, high noon in June, that was deadly to shoot. You photograph somebody outside, you can't see their eyes. Everybody looks like a raccoon. Um, so that was always a really, really big issue when it came to Kodachrome. So you had about 1/3 you'd expose for the highlights. I was actually having a conversation with somebody the other day who used to shoot it, and even though it was ISO 25 and 64, if you knew what you were doing, you'd rate it at 32 and 80. You bumped it a little bit, and you intentionally underexposed it a bit because you could always open up a dark slide, but once that detail was blown out, bye, it was
That's
gone.
that's interesting. So, and I come across this because I sort of dive into film a little bit myself. So, in when it comes to film photography, people often talk about rating a film as so and so. For a digital photographer who isn't really aware of what does that actually mean, rating a film at a different speed.
Well, it's funny. Yeah, we're kind of spoiled these days. We get digital cameras, and they usually have a base ISO of 100, which is where you should be. I mean, that's the finest part of where you should be, the finest grain color of the whole thing. Okay, but we have the option of bumping the sensitivity of the sensor, which used to be called pushing film. To give you an example, you were able to push Kodachrome 1 or 2 stops. You did not want to do that, and there was only one lab that would do that, and that was New York Film Works. And as I mentioned in the book, it looked like a last-minute ditch attempt to salvage mistakes. It really didn't work very, very well. I had one time I accidentally underexposed it by 2 stops, and it was daylight. It was people at a picnic for a brochure in sunlight, man. Oh, you would not believe everybody looked like, they were alcoholics. The veins were coming out of their noses. It was brutal, man. It was brutal looking. Their skin tones that were non-existent. Um, we don't have that problem with digital though, because you could take it up to like ridiculous, like 6-digit numbers, to have
Yeah.
ISO 1,000,000. I mean, I once took as a joke, I once took a picture of a friend of mine in a coal bin, and it came out handheld.
Yep.
I don't even know how long the exposure was, but I mean, it's sick. It just, the new cameras pull light out. That never used to be the case. You could push 1 or 2 stops, maybe with E6 was more forgiving. Kodachrome was really, really rough. Now, here's a funny thing about it. There was Kodachrome 200, which was the high speed, which was not as good as the other Kodachromes, but still was a Kodachrome, and it did give you a little bit more leeway. And during the 1980s Olympics, Kodak was a sponsor. They would, all the photographers would go there and get free film, and they had the ability to push the 200 speed Kodachrome up to I think ASA or ISO 1500 or something like that. Ridiculous amounts, but it went super purple. But
Mm.
that was okay because the stadium lights were super green,
Uh,
so it was a wash.
they've planned all of it. It was all planned.
It couldn't have worked out better than that. It's like it was a total wash. They came out a great color, and you're shooting at ISO 1500. It was grainy as all hell. You could probably see the green when you held it up to the light. But you got pictures you can use. That's the important thing. You brought it home. You got it home.
Yeah. I mean, when you're working with film that's so unforgiving, does it make photographers better at reading light, or or they're just more anxious?
I didn't know there was a problem back then.
Yeah, that's it.
I was no, no, I was fortunate in that I I kn I know light from shooting in it enough where I could go out, look at the sunlight, and I'm shooting usually Kodachrome 64 all the time. I don't need a light meter. I know where my exposure is. If that cloud slips over a little bit, I know how to adjust it. I was working with the same electronic flash system for I don't know how many years. I knew the system. I knew what those each of the light modifiers would do as far as eating light and changing light and the distance of the lights to the subject. So I was able to ballpark a lot. And then, as a last resort, what I would often do is if I had the time, I had one Nikon camera adapted to take Polaroid film, had a Polaroid back on it, and I would shoot a Polaroid of it, and Polaroid was ASA 80. So I was there. So I'd have a little contact print size Polaroid that I'd be able to eyeball with a loop just to make sure. And again, Polaroid is sloppy anyway, but it gave me an idea what was going on, and every once in a while, I'd find something that I didn't see looking through the camera that shouldn't have been in the picture, so it bailed me a few times. But, you learn your medium. If you're doing the same thing over and over, you learn from your experiences. I never really sweated the exposures very much, um, although I'll have to admit it was always a little bit weird knowing that you would leave a job, unlike digital, where you know exactly what you're going home with. But to leave a job and know that you're not gonna see the film for days, and by the
Yeah.
time you see it, you're home. You're not where the job was. So that was the I would say, the most, intimidating part of shooting Kodachrome, that little bit of mystery, and I was fortunate that very seldom did I ever get a batch of film back and say, "Oh, fire," I was fortunate. I was able to, you know, I would bracket when I could, even though I tried not to, because that's a dirty word, and I don't like doing it, it's a waste. But again, just from using the same materials and tools, you learn your stuff. You talk to anybody who's a craftsman who works with the same tools and medium for long periods of time. You know, I mean, I could stick my finger in water today and tell you if it's 68 degrees or 70.
Right.
That's something that doesn't leave you.
Yeah, it's I find this very interesting when I think back. I think back I remember watching my dad work, for example. And he used to develop black and white film at home, not color typically, but black and whites. And when I was a kid, of course, you had to go to your local, like, I don't know what you guys call it, like, it's like the equivalent of a Boots, basically, which is like a pharmacy thing that, like, you drop off your rolls and they would develop it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would take like a few days to come back, or like your local camera store or whatever. Um, and I mean, there were two things. A was normal for that. You had that delay quite naturally. But I just remember coming back to the store 3 days later or 4 days later or something with anticipation, and then you get handed the envelope and you open it up and you look through the prints and you go, "Oh, yeah, I remember that. You remember this? Oh, look at this." And of course, we're talking like 36 images tops, right? So this wasn't like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of images that become meaningless because you've taken the same shot 5 million times because you forgot that your iPhone was set to like speed burst or something, Um, but I just remember that anticipation, even as a kid. I didn't know what it meant back then. I mean, I didn't know that I would get completely absorbed and obsessed with photography then. But I just remember that thrill. It was a little bit like waiting for Santa to come at Christmas. I just remember that it was like fun. And although I really embrace and love digital photography and all the opportunities that it allows you as an artist, as a photographer. Um, I absolutely love going to town and shooting a roll of film, um, and then coming home. And again, I only shoot black and white because it's the only thing I know how to develop. you know. Um, but I love that. I love the fact that I can see on the back of the camera what I've just shot, and I love the fact that there's a delay, and it just makes it so much more valuable. I think that's the thing. It's almost like shooting digital a lot of the times it's like it's a representation of our throwaway society. I think where you can take 1,000 photos and they'll disappear on your camera roll on your iPhone and shall never be seen ever again. Potentially. And then, of course, then your iPhone gets stolen or you drop it and it's broken and they're literally gone forever and you have nothing left. There's nothing tangible, which is that's the thing. Anyway, before we go down that bit of memory lane, um,
But
eh,
by the way, on that subject, just bef
yeah,
don't lose your thought. I think it's kinda cool that Leica came out with a digital camera that doesn't have a rear screen on it. That
yeah,
I think that's wonderful. People think they're nuts, and it costs more money to have the camera without the screen than with the screen. But
yeah,
but there I happen to be in love with the idea because, yeah, it throws you back into the analog world. Now you're just constant you're not doing this every 2 sec you're taking pictures. You're just concentrating on what's happening, and you're not gonna know what happened until you get home. And
yeah.
I think that is a lot of people think that's insane, but I think that's also really, really beautiful.
I tell you what, you mentioned you were talking about knowing your exposures off by heart. I remember talking to um a friend of mine who's also my assistant some of the time. He's a video guy, a videographer, and I mentioned we're just talking casually. I mentioned the Sunny 16 rule, and he goes, "The what? The what rule?" And I said, "Well, the Sunny." He went to film school, I'm like, "The Sunny 16. You don't know what that is?" No, and so I explained it to him. He goes, like, "Well, and that works." I said, "100%. Try it out. I will guarantee you that you get usable images." He went out, he tried it, and he came back to me a few days later. He goes, "That's unbelievable." But it's like every shot is perfectly spotted, or how that makes sense, but it works. So then I said, like, "Okay, look, what we need to do is we need to go into town and spend an afternoon just doing some street photography or something, but we'll tape off the rear screen and we'll use nothing but, just our intuition and the Sunny 16 rule, and we're just gonna shoot all day, and when we get home, we'll see what we've got." you know? And it's a real test. It's such a different way of shooting, and I think it's actually liberating
Yes.
to an extent.
I had a friend who was a teacher, and his intro to photography, he would have everybody bring in their cameras and say, "Now look through the viewfinder and look at this. Look at the four corners. Pre-visualize what the camera is seeing." And then you give an assignment. He goes, "Before you leave today, come to me, bring me your camera." And you put a piece of black tape over the viewfinder. He goes, "Now go shoot the assignment by feel." And that is an amazing, amazing thing to do. That's terrific what you described. And I know other people have done it. And yeah, you want to learn photography? There you're learning how to see. And that's really what the difference is. Taking pictures and seeing are two different things.
Yeah, and I remember when everything switched to mirrorless, for example. I shot a DSLR for the longest time. I just couldn't part with my little Nikon D750 that I loved. And I shot it for 11 years or something. And it was like my everyday go-to camera I use for everything from holiday shots to professional studio work. I used that. I just liked it. It was felt good in my hand. But it's a DSLR, so you have a built-in light meter, but it's not a mirrorless camera. You can't actually see your exposure in the viewfinder immediately, you know? And I remember people
It's not
saying, "Well."
WYSIWYG.
Yeah, I mean, but I actually and I remember, like, people saying, like, "Oh, why are you shooting this whole thing?" Blah, 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 it's so much easier, to get the right exposure when you can actually see it. And I was thinking, "Well, but I don't have a problem with exposure at all. I mean, I know I can read the light meter, and I always get a good exposure and never really." And in some ways I actually found it easier, because at the time I used to shoot a lot of concerts, and I'd gotten into the habit of underexposing my shots by about half a stop to a stop, because I knew I had the latitude to get that back in post, and it just meant that I just had more wiggle room basically in terms of shutter speed and so on and so forth. Um, and I remember people saying, "Oh, you can't do that, blah, blah." It worked for me, worked perfectly. I loved it. And it was easier for me to actually read that on the light meter on the DSLR than it is for me somehow to judge that in an electronic viewfinder. Do you see what I mean? So somehow I actually found it easier to do that with a DSLR, weirdly.
Wow, that's
Might just be
interesting.
habit, you know, but,
Yeah.
it's one of those things. I mean, I've spoken to people who goes like, "Oh, you should always, expose over." I'm like, "That doesn't work for me. Not in a concert situation, it doesn't." The sensor on the D750 was so good that actually you could quite easily underexpose by a stop and not fall into the mega noise trap. They were great. I could get great images and great exposures that way. And keep the shutter speed, especially in this low light environment, keep the shutter speeds such that I could actually create some sharp images. I don't know. It just worked for me. All of you concert photographers listening out there, you can leave your comments. I don't know, but it just worked for me.
You'll never know the joy of shooting Ansco 1600 color slide film, where the grain was so big, it's like 5 dots of green, and that was the image. It's just
Yeah,
like you didn't need a magnifier to see it. But I used back in the '70s, I used to shoot concerts with that stuff, and, it
yeah.
worked. It was terrible, but it
It's
worked.
I can't remember who said that to me, but somebody said to me like, if grain is your only problem with your shot, then you've got bigger problems, and it's probably true. You know. Um,
Yeah.
Now, when you mentioned earlier that certain types of film worked really great with portraiture, but not so good with, let's say, landscapes. When it comes to Kodachrome specifically, uh, what types of subject matters did it particularly excel in, and uh, was there anything where it could be quite difficult to handle?
Wow, I used it for everything, and, I might have had to add some filtration on, every once in a while for, color balance if I was mixing lights, but I really would use it for everything, be it, outdoor scenery or, portraits with or natural light or with electronic flash. Um, I can't really say that it excelled for any one particular subject. I've never thought about that, but I really cannot think of anything in particular. Again, a majority of what I did for a long time was, yachting, boats, and, working outdoors and working, below decks with flash and tight, crazy tight quarters. Um, but I knew the film. because I use it all the time. I use the same thing all the time. It's like cooking. If you're using the same ingredients, you don't need to measure them after a while. You know exactly what goes into it. It's all by feel. But I don't, and I can't think of anybody who had a specialty for Kodachrome, something they only use Kodachrome for.
But
I mean,
that in itself makes it an extremely versatile film, which in itself
yeah,
is like a superpower almost.
because again, it's neutral. It just it portrayed what was there. And that's really what the goal is. I mean, isn't it? You want to have accuracy. See, one of the problems I have with a lot of the digital cameras, I mentioned Fuji earlier. I love Fuji cameras, and I used a ton of their film back in the day. Um, is that the colors look great, but there's a bias to them. And
Oh.
when I shoot, I try to keep everything, again, be it film or digital. Let me have everything dead neutral. Give me the most accurate thing, and then if I want to exaggerate anything or play with anything or manipulate anything, I'll do it from the neutral. I don't want it out of the box that way, and I think that's one of the things with film. Every film has a personality, and Kodachrome was probably one of the most universally agreeable films, no matter what you were shooting, and you knew that the art director and the printer is not gonna give you pushback if you turned it in, ever.
Now, you mentioned earlier, we're talking about the sort of by modern standards, the relatively low, ISO ratings on early Kodachrome film. Like I think in the book, the original Kodachrome was like ISO 10 or something.
Yeah,
Um,
mhm.
I mean, how by modern standards that would just I think that would just break my brain. How restrictive was that the in the 1930s for photographers?
We're talking about ISO 10, and then there was a big deal when it went to, ISO, 25 and then 64. Keep in mind that no films were real fast back then. None of
Mm.
them. Tri-X was 400. That was a fast film. A fast color film would be 800 to 1600. After that, you were pushing. The labs would now be doing the additional work, the heavy lifting. Films did not come higher ISOs, to my best of my memory of 1600, and that was an Ansco film, I believe. Anscochrome or possibly I think it was Anscochrome.
Mm.
And it was good. It took pictures, but it was a miserable film. Forget about the forget about, it was grainy and the colors were exaggerated, but you got a picture that you can use and reproduce, and again, if you're shooting concerts, there was no real color anyway, it didn't matter. It was all good. So that was the big thing, and I remember probably the fastest film I ever shot in the analog days was, a Kodak black and white film, was called 2475 recording film. You could literally see the grain on the film just holding it up like this. It corkscrewed. It was almost impossible to hold flat. It immediately turned into a corkscrew when you
Really?
let it dried. Yeah, you'd have to, like, nail it down to the negative carrier and the enlarger and tape it down 'cause it would push the 2 plates apart. Um, and it was grainy as all heck, but that was the fastest film that I can remember. So keep in mind that, again, every film that we're using was 100 to 200 to 400 tops. Um, Somebody made a 640 color slide film, ISO 640, but that was it. There was no
Mm.
such thing as 2,000 or 50,000 or whatever these ridiculous that's why I laugh when I look at what's going on there right now. I mean, it's so easy to take a picture these days. That's that's the whole thing, okay? It used to be an art and a craft. It used to be that you had to know exactly what you're doing if you wanted to take a good photo. You could take a picture, but if you want to take a good picture, you had to know what you're doing. Now, it's just so forgiving that, I hate to say it, but anybody can take a great picture these days. Technically great picture. Aesthetically, there we could talk.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I always, I look at my modern studio cameras that I use now. They're basically spaceships. Essentially, computers with a lens on it. That's essentially it. Um, and it's in some ways it's it makes your life easier, but I think there's certain photographic principles where you still need to have the knowledge in order to get the desired result. I was experimenting with like extremely narrow depth of field the other day, and you went straight back to, ND filters, and you had to really know what you were doing, and you had to know how to meter the light, for instance, stuff like that, in order for it to actually work. And it was interesting. It was an interesting process. I like it because it's sort of almost like it is geeky, and it's quite arty, and you're putting a lot of energy in to get the result that you sort of have in your head, and you gotta it's there's an element of discovery and risk. I think risk is actually the biggest thing because it's more likely to fail than not. And I think that's the kind of, that's the thing. It's a bit like improvising on a guitar, where if you're improvising, like I say, you're playing a solo, you got 32 bars or something and you're going for it. If you really go for it, you take risks. That's where improvisation is at its best, when you're taking risks and you fall flat on your face half the time, and that's cool because the other stuff you played was phenomenal, but it's only phenomenal because you're taking the risk. If you play it safe, it's pretty much always going to be boring, and I think that's what I love about photography. Um, Now, Kodachrome obviously developed over time, and it was Kodachrome II and Kodachrome-X, I believe.
Yeah.
Um, what was it that those reiterations made possible all of a sudden?
Well, first of all, you went from ISO 10 to 25 and 64. So right there, you've got a huge gain.
Yeah.
Okay. Suddenly you can actually take sharp pictures without a tripod. Um, um, so that was a big deal. And the color quality was better. The grain was tighter. And the same thing for Kodachrome 25 and 64, which came out in the 70s, about 10 years later. They were comparably sharper and tighter as far as color and tonality. They at that point, they really, really had Kodachrome figured out. It was a great film. I can't think of any the narrow range of contrast, between highlights and shadows and the lack of ability to get a lot of width in that. That was probably the only shortcoming the film really ever had. The fact that, you couldn't hold shadows and a
Mhm.
highlights under bright light. You couldn't do it.
You cover an interesting thing in your book called Project 237. I think it
Yeah.
was called. Um, and it was like an unsuccessful effort to sort of broaden the range. Would you call that?
Yeah, they wanted the goal of it was to improve all of the Kodachromes, take them up to even a better level because the competition film was getting better. Fuji color was getting really, really good. Fuji kicked the crap out of Kodak for a long time. There were a lot of people shooting Fuji over Kodak, whereas once upon a time, Kodak was the whole story. Um, so they wanted to improve it. They wanted to have a better 25. They wanted to have an ISO 100 film and an ISO 400 film in addition to the 200, which was already out. And there were a lot of technical problems. They wanted to tie in their T technology, which was a tighter grain structure they were using in, I think, pretty much all their color films, right? And all their T-Max films. If you see T-Max, that's T technology for grain structure. And they had different coding machines, and they had a lot of trouble with it. After all was said and done, they finally had the coding machines solve the problems with that. They changed the facility so the machines didn't work anymore. They had an ISO 100 Kodachrome, which was real good, but they realized it's going to steal sales from Kodachrome 64, which it's just a not even a full stop faster. And why monkey around with a moneymaker? Because 64 was a successful product. You don't want to mess around. And the 400 never quite made it. It was not what they would call a Kodachrome film. It never had right. It never rose to the occasion. And they said, we're not going to do it. It's just wrong to put that name on it. So out of all of that, they just had an improved 200. So that was it. So it came out to 25, 64, and ISO 200. And that's what we were left with. And those were the last 3.
One thing I wonder, is, I wonder why Kodachrome as a film, used to thrive so much in, in the consumer sphere, if you want, in stills photography, let's say. But why has it never become sort of a major, theatrical motion picture format?
Several reasons. Okay, number 1, like I mentioned, the contrast. If you're shooting on Kodachrome and you have to duplicate it, you ever try duplicating Kodachrome? It is a bitch,
Yeah.
okay? The shadows are gone, highlights are gone. It's very difficult without a lot of advanced masking. It's difficult. That was one problem. Another problem, well, there were several actually. Another problem is that, the big film at the time was, Technicolor.
Mm.
And, there were 2 problems there. Number 1, when Kodachrome came out, Technicolor had an agreement signed by Kodak that Kodachrome will never be used for professional motion picture use, okay?
Right.
Because they didn't wanna lose their big little puppy, okay? And another problem was that even though and this is funny, even though Kodachrome is the most stable color film made, if you project it for 1 hour, it starts fading. It cannot handle projection, whereas Technicolor, you could do it for hours on end before the film starts to show wear and tear and fading. Kodachrome has no legs for projection.
That's really
So
interesting.
isn't that? So,
Yeah.
but now so the 8 millimeter and 16 millimeter, which is where they were making their money in motion picture, that was no problem because again, there was no one's reproducing that stuff. Even though they did have a service, they'll make copies, they were terrible. So the 8 millimeter and 16 millimeter for amateur and semi-pro, they had no problem. They sold that stuff to the very till 2009, I believe. But otherwise for motion pictures, which was the original goal of it, funny enough, because they wanted to make a better movie film, it never happened.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting thought, um, 'cause, yeah, I mean, of course, yeah, Technicolor is such a big name, in color films, you see it everywhere. In fact, the closer, I never really thought about this, but usually, the outro of this podcast, I always mention, for those of you who, listening to the audio version, please, check out the YouTube version, where you can find the full episode in full Technicolor over there. I just say it, I don't really think about it. Maybe I'll change it to Kodachrome now.
With a link to the book, of course.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, 100%. Oh, and, let me just mention that because, obviously, we've been talking about your book. For those of you listening or watching this on YouTube, in full Kodachrome, of course, make sure you check out the description because you'll find all the links, to the book and so on, and to Alan's, socials and everything, in the description below. So no matter whether you're listening to this on audio, on Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, or wherever you're listening, um, or whether you're watching this on YouTube, check out the description. I highly recommend it. It's such a great read. And the advertising imagery in it, I find so fascinating. I love seeing these, seeing old advertising images. I've always loved it. Actually, even so, London is one of these cities, by the way, which is again really fascinating. Where, of course, back in the Victorian times, billboards were painted on the walls of buildings.
Yep.
Regular apartment houses or whatever. And I don't know, I don't actually know how that worked. I think whether they would rent the space or whatever, but they used to
It was all rented. They do in Manhattan, New York City, it's the same thing. There's little old buildings with in the side of 'em, and yeah, they would rent it. They pay to paint up the side.
Yeah, and I always find it fascinating, and of course, in a lot of places, especially when you drive through, central London, on those old buildings, you can still see where these posters used to be, 'cause often you can see, there's, like, shadows and remnants of what the paint. I find it super fascinating, and now with these digital billboard things that are it's just not the same thing.
No.
I went to Vegas, the other day, and it's like when you drive into London, you have these digital things, but, when I drove into Vegas, that was a whole different ballgame. These things are freaking nuts, you know? Um, Now, you know what? We talked about this a little bit earlier. Shooting Kodachrome, right, or any film for that matter, back in the day was, it wasn't just simply like, shooting film. It was like a whole ritual, the whole thing, you know? Um What was it like back in the day for you when, to shoot a thing, you had to mail it off, wait for it to come back? What was that experience like? Do you miss that experience at all?
Oh, do I miss driving into Manhattan? No, I don't. Uh, Early on, I would use Kodak services, and there was a camera store. I was living in New Jersey at the time. A lot of my work was out of New York and Philadelphia. I was right in between the two cities. Um, and I had a local Kodak dealer who would get me 2 days service. So if I had the time, I would just drop all the film off by him, and I know that 2 days later, by 2 in the afternoon, I could pick it up. He even had a light box off to the side for me. I didn't even have to leave. I was just I had a loop and a light box in his store, so I would actually edit things down and then go to the post office if I had to, if I wasn't dropping it off myself. Um, but otherwise, for a lot of my work, especially work that had a quick turnaround, I would go into Manhattan. I was about an hour outside of Midtown, and go to New York Film Works, the lab I mentioned earlier that had fast turnaround. And again, if I was there by 5 in the afternoon, by 9 the next morning, I would have my processed Kodachrome. If I was there by 9 in the morning, by 4 or 5 in the afternoon, I would have my film back. And for a fee, I can get it back in 2 hours. I pay like twice the amount. But there were times I'd be able to shoot a job in the morning and flip it and drop it off at the art director that afternoon on Kodachrome. So that's the extent I went to. So often it meant making a trip into the city and, dropping the film off and going out having lunch, or, going and meeting a friend or something, and then heading back and editing the film and heading uptown to wherever the art director was.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild. Of course, by modern standards, where you basically click the button, the image is immediately there, it's done. Especially now, like, with things like, Evoto, for example, it's one of these things. Like, now when I shoot a commercial headshot, for example, especially when I'm on location, I'm shooting, like whatever, 20, 30, 40 headshots on location. I mean, when I click the button, that image, not only does it immediately arrive on the screen, but it's immediately fully retouched and processed when it goes through Evoto. Like, even 3 years ago, that was really unthinkable, because you still had to think like, okay, well, I have to, go through the whole editing process afterwards and have to retouch all the images, blah, blah, it's time you factored in. Now, it's I mean, I'd say 95% cooked by the time I push the button. And the client literally sees an image that's literally 95% fully retouched and done. That's just
Yeah.
mind-boggling.
And you know what once mind boggled me? I had a client in Chicago, and I'm working in New Jersey in a studio, and I'm shooting a product for them to their layout, and I shoot a 4 by 5 Polaroid, and I fax it to them in Chicago. That
Yeah.
was amazing technology. Oh my god, I'm showing work to my client in Chicago.
I know. I mean, that's it's that in itself, yeah, I mean, it's the same. I mean, that's, if you think about it, it's wild. Like, even with, like, if you just take an iPhone for as an example, right? You take a picture on your iPhone, and I actually still don't understand why you can't do that on a full camera, and it's just like, I have some theories about that, but I mean, I can take a shot on my iPhone as I'm nearly, like, melting away in the heat in Paris, and literally within a split second, my mom in the south of Germany gets that picture on her phone, and she can immediately see in real time what our suffering is. You know? It's just it's just like, it's wild, and it feels so normal now. This is the thing. And actually, because it feels so normal, and this is I had a really interesting conversation with my 15-year-old daughter, um, because I mentioned earlier that she wanted a point and shoot camera, for her birthday. And whilst we were in Paris, because I noticed that there were lots of people in their early 20s running around with point and shoot cameras, and I'm like, "Am I like, what have I missed? Is this a trend?" And she goes like, "Yeah, yeah, it's a trend. Yeah, everybody's doing it." And I'm like, why do people do this? I don't really understand. If you have your phone, right? You either have a phone or a camera, basically. What is the And she goes like, "Well, it's because that generation is almost like rebelling against the instantness of of images. They actually want to have a device that is solely dedicated to this one thing, rather than having, a phone that does a million things at the same time." Um, and like Cara, my daughter, she goes like, "Oh, and the images look so cool. They look so much better." And I'm thinking, I don't know. They don't really look that great to me, but hey,
If you wanna have a really good understanding of that mindset, there's a book called, I don't remember the author, but it's called The Revenge of Analog. Came out about 7, 8 years ago,
great.
and it explains why people are listening to vinyl records and playing card games and board games and putting down things that are not analog, and it talks about the mindset of that. And that will explain what's going on. Yeah, if you go to, like, B&H Photo right now, the used department, there are no point and shoots on the shelf. All of these people who never shot film or real cameras
Mm.
are buying them up and using it for the novelty of it. I went out, about a year ago, and I've got, one of the original Leica point and shoots, 3.2 megapixel. It's a Fuji camera,
I do
or really
remember it.
bad.
I do
Yeah,
remember
it's a
it.
great
Yeah,
little
yeah, yeah.
camera. And it's got and it takes wonderful photographs. I mean, you can't make anything bigger than a 4 by 5, but the color's gorgeous. It's this beautiful CCD sensor, and it takes great pictures.
Yeah, my
Slow as
uncle has one of
hell.
those. Yeah,
Yeah.
my uncle has one of those. Actually, I do remember, I don't know, 5, 6 years ago, whenever, I played around with it, and it is actually really good. It's pretty nice.
It's refreshing. And by the way, you're talking about, going out and shooting with film and all that stuff. I will quite often take one of my cameras and put it into total manual, everything manual.
Yeah.
Exposure, focus, and that's the way I'll go out taking pictures, just to remind myself what it's all about and to get that hands-on to make myself think, to become part of the action, not just be a bystander.
And
So
it's one
that's
of
something I do all the time.
Yeah, and it's one of the greatest, creative advices, I think, generally is, limitation drives creativity. I think that's the thing, it's, of course, it's easy. I mean, it's interesting, there's one, thing in the book where basically it says, Kodachrome from the invention of Kodachrome to autofocus was still 50 years. Like, that's insane when you think about it, and we don't, again, with modern cameras, we don't really think about, you don't really I mean, other than the eternal race for autofocus and blah, 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 and all that kind of stuff, you don't really think about autofocus being a thing. It seems normal. It seems like sort of basic, in a camera. But of course it isn't, and it wasn't, back in the day when everything was manual. Um, and you're right. It's sometimes taking these comforts almost away just pushes you to think differently or to actually even think. First of all, think. That's always a good starting point. Um, and it drives your creativity, which is incidentally, when I talked about using extremely shallow depth of field, it's an interesting exercise because now you really have to think where your focus point is going to sit. You know, is it going to sit directly on the pupil, on the eyeball, or not? Or actually, do you want to tell a different story? Do you want to move that somewhere else? Because now you have that really super narrow slither of sharpness, that you can move to
Mhm.
wherever you want it to be. And it's an interesting, really interesting exercise, and it makes you think. Like you say, it makes you think differently.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, I tell you what, let's talk a little bit about the advertising image because again, it's such a beautiful part of the book. Um, Uh, I I mean, Kodak's advertising at the time was incredibly powerful. It's just the images, it was just, it told such a great story. Um, I was wondering, like, what was it really selling, though? Was it selling, film? Was it selling the color? Was it selling, family and memory or aspiration, or was it trying to sell all of these things?
It was selling cameras and projectors and everything to go along with with film. Um, that was always a driving force, it seems. If you look at the ads, that they're talking about how easy it is to capture memories. They talk about memories a lot. They play around a lot with it, especially after World War II. During World War II, Kodachrome pretty much came to a dead stop because all of their or Kodak's work was going into X-ray film and X-ray chemistry. They basically went into war mode.
Yeah.
But when the war was over, all of a sudden, all these soldiers are coming back. And if you look at the ads, as soldier, it's time to start building memories. Um, and even during the war, the few ads they did have, they always said, made a little promise that memories will be back, pictures will be back. They always said that just this will happen again. It's all okay. They were trying to be reassuring while saying that right now we're supporting the war.
Mm.
But as soon as the soldiers came back and the boomers started popping out all over the place, um, all of a sudden, new cameras are coming out and projectors and screens, and they're pushing. Now's the time to start making memories. You've got your new family, you're going on vacation. And that's really what drove it because it was a whole engine. The film was just the beginning of it. Film is, what recorded it. But again, Kodak followed it up with cameras, projectors, screens, all kinds of accessories to go along with all of this stuff. And they kept improving it. And so it was a family of items. It wasn't just film. So you used your imagery to drive it. And they would, depending on when it was, initially, they were just showing how easy it was to take a picture or make a motion picture with inexpensive gear. It was very, very parochial, very basic. Then they started going out, having a little bit more fun, a little bit more looser environments. They're out on the beach, they're out on vacation, they're laughing and smiling, getting water fountains splashed in their faces, and catching life's moments. And that's what they were building on. They were basically selling sentimentality, for the lack of a better word. Family, togetherness, memories, and that was the whole driving force of Kodak's marketing. And Kodachrome led the march.
And at the same time, it feels like it was also influencing family life in a sense, because that ability of freezing memories, it had a major impact on family life, I think in general. It's just
Oh yeah.
incredible to think, what impact that must have had at the time.
Well, a lot of the ads showed families, gathered in the living room, projecting, and they're all laughing and having a great time of, old memories. Again, they were just cashing in on the same thing, but it definitely had an impact on family life. It was about, get recording memories and bringing family together and being able to remember unique events. And again, how else do you sell something, a commodity of this sort? If you think
You know
about
what?
it.
What I really find fascinating about this is, I'm just trying to sort of imagine what it must have been like, um, at a time when this really became, you know, a, a possibility for like your average family to all of a sudden, take, fantastic color images, of family life with cameras that were easy to use and small and portable, and you didn't need tripods and all the rest of it. And you could look back, you could look at those prints and go like, "Oh, that's funny," Uncle George's birthday party, look at that.
We're assuming that the technology will exist in 50 years to play back these images.
Good point.
Uh, I'll
Yes.
give you a classic example, okay? In the year 1000, the King of England, uh, ordered up what they call the Domesday Book. Are you familiar with it?
Oh, the Doomsday Book. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, okay. It's the history of the United Kingdom in the year 1000. And
In
they
fact
for the
in
it
fact, just in brackets, the town that I live in, Rickmansworth,
Yeah.
is mentioned in the Doomsday Book.
Oh, okay, alright,
Uh,
okay. So, do you know what happened in the year 2000?
no, actually, I don't.
Okay, they came up with an idea. It's now 1,000 years later, but now we're in the digital age. Let's do a digital Domesday Book. Okay, and they did.
Right.
Okay. Problem is within a few years, nobody could read this stuff anymore because the technology changed and they had to get a whole bunch of undergraduates to rewrite the code so that it will come back again so they could read it. I mean, it's really funny. We're going to the moon now. We were there already 50 years ago. The problem is that the tapes that were made that explain everything have disintegrated. The machinery that read the tapes doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And the people who designed it all are dead or, wearing wraparound sunglasses in Miami Beach right now, and you can't talk to them. Um, so no, seriously, it takes so short a time for all of this to be impossible to view. And that's why I love the fact I could still pick up an 80-year-old Kodachrome and there, that
Yeah.
son of a gun. It's 100% of what it was.
Yeah.
Yet I can't find JPEGs I shot 10 years ago. And that's one of the fragilities of digital. I find that, there's no legs to it. You just don't have legs to them. If you have a JPEG that's 10 years old and you've worked on it in several different variations of Photoshop or whatever other programs, you may not be able to work on it much longer because if you skip enough generations of software, it may not be able to even open up the file. It becomes very corrupted. Uh, and again, you don't have that with film. Film's got its own limitations, obviously, but you could. I learned photography on a 4x5 camera starting in 1966. I still have my 4x5 negatives. I could
Yeah.
open up the box and pick them up and hold them up. I can print them. I could scan them, which I did. I was taking work I did 50 years ago, scanning it and
Yeah.
working with it digitally now. Images that are captured today on a digital formats, I don't know what the future of them will be without
I
a
th
lot of careful curation.
the fact that that Kodak decided to stop making Kodachrome has had such an impact. I mean, it spawned movies, books, you know.
Yeah.
Um, I do you think is that the reason why it has caused this sort of resurgence of interest in Kodachrome? Or actually, the other thing, even the more important thing that I wanna know, because, just asking for a friend. Obviously, there's still you can still buy Kodak films out there, Kodak Gold and whatever else.
Yeah.
Is there a comparable is there a product that Kodak still makes today or is still available today that's in any way, shape, or form comparable to Kodachrome?
No.
Damn it.
No. No, no. I mean, Kodachrome is kinda it was a black and white film. And if you've ever taken a Kodachrome if you ever have an opportunity to hold a Kodachrome transparency,
Yeah.
look at the back side of it and hold it up to light, and you're gonna see a bar relief. It's actually a relief of the image, and it's in black and white, and you're looking at a black and white negative. The reason why the colors are so consistent on Kodachrome is that on E6 film, the colors are in the film when it's manufactured. So depending on the batch, depending on how old the film is, where it was stored, temperatures, all kinds of variables, the color changes. Whereas Kodachrome is essentially a black and white medium that the color was introduced during processing at specific times so that the color is unaffected by anything previous to that environmentally. So they have a lot more control over it and the dyes are a lot more stable. So it has a very different quality to it altogether compared to other films. As a funny little thing, there are still people shooting Kodachrome and developing it just for the black and white layer, and I don't know why they're doing that,
That's interesting.
but that's weird. I mean, they're doing it, developing, and they're shooting black and white slides. There's nothing remarkable about it, and it costs a lot of money to do that, but there are some people that's what they're doing. I shoot everything in black and white. I shoot raw, but I do all my viewing through black and white because it's harder to take a good black and white photograph. You have to look for composition more. I mean, color's a
Yes.
cheater. I mean, and I'm not saying that I used to use color all the time to make a picture better to cheat, especially with boating. When you have a white boat and blue skies, man, you throw a
Oh,
red sweater on somebody, man,
ye
bang, So I'm very aware of color, but I'm also more aware of the fact that it's much more difficult to find and capture a good composition in monochrome. I f
absolutely.
that to me is the challenge. I mean, it really is. So, like you said, I always have the color picture if I want it, but the secret of art? It's classic, okay? If you can't make it good, make it big, and if you can't make it big, paint it red.
Hence the black dresses, hence the red dresses. For imagine anybody in their 20s, reading Kodachrome, or, reading your book, Kodachrome. What is it that you hope, that young photographer will be able to take away from that?
Ooh, wow. Number 1, that, whoever thought that film would have a soul, you know? As I said, it's kind of a love story, and you asked about any other film that they could possibly write a book about. I can't think of any other film that it would work.
Yeah.
There's just so many things that come together here. Again, it's photography, it's pop culture, it's advertising, it's color, it's people, it's how we've evolved over the past century.
After listening to this episode, people should really, I think, should really get a taste for, Kodachrome and get into it and try it out and see what it's all about. I think that's and again, the advertising imagery in the book is just so beautiful. I could just, and I know I will pick up your book and just look at the pictures. It's so fascinating. Right. Okay, Alan. One thing I tend to do at the end of each episode is a 6-question quick fire round. Are you ready?
All right.
All right. Cool. All right. Quick fire round. Question number
Yeah.
1: Kodachrome 25 or 64?
64.
Cool. One camera you most associate with your Kodachrome years?
Ooh. Nikon F3.
Nice. Best subject to photograph on Kodachrome?
Everything.
Cool. Perfect.
Yeah. I really can't narrow it down. I can't. We kind of covered that earlier. No, I can't.
Yeah.
Everything.
Awesome. All right. So this next question is interesting. A photograph by anyone that perfectly captures the Kodachrome era.
Oh God. What was his name? Pete Turner. Any photograph by Pete Turner taken in the late 60s, early 70s. All right. And there's another photograph taken by another photographer whose name just escapes me. It's a photograph of a row of garages, white garage doors with a blue sky over them. And one of the garage doors is open and a white Cadillac is sticking out. 1959 Cadillac with huge fins.
Yeah.
And I forgot who shot it. I'm ashamed of myself.
And I think I know the image you're talking about. This does ring a bell. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
And it was using Kodak's advertising. It was an amazing image. But Pete Turner, anything by Pete Turner from the late 60s, early 70s, that's definitely
Cool.
quintessential Kodachrome.
All right. So question number 5: slides on a light box or projected in a darkroom?
Light box with a good loop. Not a cheap loop, a good loop.
Cool. One thing every digital photographer should try at least once.
Turning off the screen.
Haha. Exactly.
Don't check.
Alan, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for being the guest on the Camera Shake podcast this week.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute treat. Really a lot of fun chatting with you about Kodachrome and all the other things we talked about today.
Yeah. Okay, folks, that is it for today. A huge thank you to Allan Weitz for joining us on the show this week. This was a fantastic conversation about Kodachrome, the history of color photography, the craft of shooting film, and why certain photographic processes continue to resonate long after they disappear. But before we go, let me just recommend another episode I think you'll love. Check out episode 315 with Jefferson Graham. It's a fascinating conversation about smartphones, photography, and where the medium may be heading next. It's a great companion episode to today's look back at one of photography's most influential films. If you enjoy our content, consider supporting the show by buying us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/camerashake. You can make that bourbon. That'll work even better. You can also check out the official Camera Shake podcast merchandise at camerashakepodcast.com. Your support helps us continue bringing you these conversations every week. And of course, for all of those of you who are listening to the audio version, don't forget there's a full video version available on YouTube in full Kodachrome. See what I did there? Complete with examples from Alan's Kodachrome work and imagery from the book. Just search for Camera Shake Podcast and you'll find it there. And if you're already on YouTube, leave us a comment, hit the like button, subscribe, ring the bell, and share this episode with your photography friends. It really helps us reach more creatives around the world. Thank you for listening, of course, and thank you for watching. And remember, a new episode drops every Thursday. So until next time, keep shaking things up in the world of photography, and I'll see you next Thursday.